So I want to give a quick summary of what I shared last week, because I said last week that today is last week that it was a kind of a two-part message, that I'd introduce some ideas last week, and then today I'm kind of bring it all together. So quick summary of last week, what we explored from John chapter 6. What we saw in John chapter 6 was that Jesus performed an incredible miracle as he fed this large crowd of at least 5,000 people. And in doing this, he revealed some very important truths about himself and then about people. So about Jesus, we learned that Jesus and his ability to produce the miracle is not dependent upon us. Right? Like, it's not dependent on the size of the faith or whatever it is we're bringing to Jesus. Jesus has the power and the ability to provide the miracle independent of what we offer. And so Jesus was offered 2 small fish and 5 small barley loaves, and from that he fed thousands and thousands of people. We also learned that Jesus is not a supernatural vending machine who will just dispense to us whatever our desires or demands for a miracle might be. He's not that. See, Jesus provides the miracles that he does, not because of our demands or desires, but because of his love and his grace. Right? Jesus gives the miracle because he wants to, because he loves us. We learned about people that some in the crowd were just chasing Jesus for a free fish sandwich, right? They weren't really pursuing and following Jesus for the right reasons. They were just looking to fill their bellies. But we learned that Jesus teaches that we're supposed to seek him and his kingdom and to stop chasing the things of this world. We learned that doing this, it begins by doing the work that God requires. And we learned that the work God requires is to believe in the one he has sent. So that's really pretty small, simple, and easy. The work God requires of us is small, simple, and easy. Because Jesus has done and will do all the hard things. Like, Jesus has done the hard part. He is the one who provides the miracle. It's not on us to provide the miracle. That's his job. So the work God requires is small. That means that our part in the work is small. We're to believe in Jesus. Jesus said that our faith, it need only be as big as a mustard seed, which is very small, very small. But that small seed of faith, it will grow as we allow God to grow it in our lives. The work God requires is simple. What we do, our part in the work, is to take Jesus at his word. That's it. Like, your job, my job, is trust Jesus. Take him at his word. So that was last Sunday. Today, what I hope to provide you is to show that even though our part in this is small, simple, and easy, it still remains that truly following Jesus can be challenging. Like, that there will be times and circumstances where it will really challenge us even to bring something very small to Jesus. Leaving the things of the world behind in order to fully pursue Jesus and his kingdom, his righteousness, that's challenging. Because it really goes against kind of every fiber of our being. Because what's kind of in us right now is to satisfy ourselves, to seek pleasure, satisfaction, comfort, all these things for self. And that's kind of contrary and opposite a lot of times of what Jesus is wanting us to pursue. And the world around us would say, go for it. Follow your heart. Be your best you. And, well, we don't necessarily in the world around us have a message of follow Jesus. Be faithful. Be obedient. Take him at his word. So that means kind of what's against us is like the prevailing wind that's in our faces is kind of blowing us away from Jesus, you might say, rather than pushing us towards him. And that makes it challenging sometimes then to really fully follow Jesus. So we also learned last week that John included a lot of details in his gospel, and he did that in order to point the reader to bigger truths than just that moment and connect people to these ideas in the Old Testament. So a lot of the details John provides is to have the reader call to mind like, oh yeah, Passover. We got to pay attention to that because it was almost the time for the Passover. There are important details like the location, the time that we pay attention to because it connects us to this bigger story. And so what we're going to see today is that John does this in a way to allow Jesus to talk about himself, compare himself to something called manna. Now you might say, manna, what is it? Well, you'll see shortly. Thank you, Jennifer. The crowd asked him, what must we do to do the works God requires? Jesus answered, the work of God is this, to believe in the one he has sent. So they asked him, what sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them the bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, from now on give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. So someone in the crowd that day called out to Jesus, our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness. And it was just this perfect setup for Jesus. If it had been a volleyball game, that comment would have been the little lob to the net where another player comes in just to spike it. It was a perfect setup for Jesus. And Jesus took the opportunity then with that statement to make some really important and bold claims about himself, significant claims about who he is. And even the way that Jesus replied saying, I am the bread of life, is in itself very significant. So verse 35 in John chapter 6 is the first of 7 I am statements by Jesus. And Jesus saying I am is a way for Jesus to connect himself and compare himself to Yahweh, to God the Father. He did this by using the name that God used to reveal himself to Moses when God was calling Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. So God told Moses, tell the Israelites, I am has sent you. And so God revealed his personal name in this way. And Jesus is grabbing hold of that so that his hearers would understand he's making a connection to the Father. And he's saying that he and the Father are one. And so for Jesus to say, I am the bread of life is a really, really big deal. So along with Jesus' claim on God's name, Jesus said that he was the true manna from God, the true bread from heaven that gives life. This is also a really big and significant claim by Jesus. I'm going to tell you a little bit about manna. And what we know about manna comes primarily from 2 places, Exodus chapter 16 and Deuteronomy chapter 8. So in Exodus, we read this. In the desert, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. In the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, what is it? For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, it is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. The people of Israel called the bread manna. So when they saw this substance that the Lord had provided for them, they look at it and they say, what is it? And that was actually 2 Hebrew words. And from those 2 Hebrew words, they ended up calling this substance that God was providing to nourish them manna. And we learn a little bit more about why God provided for his people in the manner that he did. And this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 8. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the wilderness these 40 years to humble and test you in order to know what was in your heart, whether or not you would keep his commands. He humbled you, causing you to hunger and then feeding you with manna, which neither you nor your ancestors had known, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Now, the last part of what we read there is really important. See, manna was God's provision for his people, and it also served as a test of their faith and faithfulness to God. Like, would they trust him? Would they take the Lord at his word? He had said to them, I'm going to give you this promised land. I'm going to care for you. I'm going to meet your needs. I'll protect and provide for you. They didn't do so great, but that's a different message. So manna was God's provision for his people. And I would say that for all of God's miracles, God provided for his people, again, not because they complained or because they demanded, take us back to where we had food to eat every day. God provided for them because of his great love and his grace. That's why God gives the miracle. So this Deuteronomy 8 passage, it introduces a really important, and I would say universal spiritual truth. Let me read it again. It says, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. That truth was true for all time and all people. So it was true for the Israelites as they were wandering about the desert. It's true for us today. And what God is saying in this is that it's not sufficient just to have physical food, physical bread. There's more to life than just what we put in our bellies. Man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. It's true for the Israelites. It's true for the Jews. As Jesus performed a miracle, feeding more than 5,000, it's true for us. In John 6, Jesus had this to say to the crowd. Do not work for food that spoils, but food that endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man will give you. Very truly, I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Sir, they said, give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. Very truly, I tell you, the one who believes in me has eternal life. I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness of our soul. Jesus and Jesus alone provides us what nothing and no one can. Jesus is the one that satisfies our soul. He does that in a way that provides us life now and in the future. See, Jesus provides us the life that God created all of us to experience now and into eternity. Jesus said, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. Now, this statement, when Jesus said this, he was looking ahead. He was looking into his future for when he would be killed by crucifixion. He was looking ahead to a time when he would willingly give his life for the life of all people. And so Jesus, by giving his life on the cross, he took the place of each person. See, what we, for our sin and sinfulness, deserve is punishment. What we deserve is death. Jesus, however, was without sin. Jesus was perfect. He lived a blameless life. He did not deserve to die. And so what Jesus did was he stood in our place. He took kind of small, simple, and easy. And yet, despite this, I see that truly following Jesus can be really challenging. It can be really challenging for people. I think that was true with that crowd 2,000 years ago. I think not much has changed in people today. At this, the Jews there began to grumble about Jesus because he said, I am the bread that came down from heaven. They said, is this not Jesus, the son of Joseph, whose father and mother we know? How can he now say, I came down from heaven? Now, the distance from Capernaum where Jesus was teaching, from Capernaum to Nazareth was about 20 miles. So it really wasn't that far apart. Sure, they didn't have Uber. They couldn't just pop over real quick to Capernaum from Nazareth. But it wasn't that far apart. Probably some people had done business. There was trade that went on. There were families to visit, things like that. And so Nazareth, where Jesus grew up, wasn't that far from where this crowd was. And so part of the crowd's objection to Jesus was like, wait, hold on a minute. Don't we know this guy's parents? Don't we know Joseph and Mary and his brothers and sisters? So how can this guy now say, I'm the bread from heaven? We know his family. What I see in that is that the very smallest of things can be a barrier to faith. The smallest of things can detract us and then become a barrier to faith in Jesus. So Jesus said to them, truly I tell you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. And I will raise them up at the last day, for my flesh is real food, and my blood is real drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in them. Just as the living through the eating of bread and the drinking of the cup. Again, what we call the Lord's Supper. In John chapter 6, Jesus gave a preview of what was going to be true in the future for his disciples and then eventually for us. And it has come true. Now, at the time Jesus gave this teaching about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, this was really challenging and difficult for those Israelites to accept. And some of those disciples, they just couldn't get with the program. And so on hearing it, many of his disciples said, this is a hard teaching. Who can accept it? Aware that his disciples were grumbling about this, Jesus said to them, does this offend you? The words I have spoken to you, they are full of the Spirit and life. Yet there are some of you who do not believe. From this time, many of his disciples turned back and no longer followed him. See, when it becomes too difficult to take Jesus at his word, what we see is that many disciples turn back and they stop following him. So the crowd that day, they turned away from Jesus and turned back to what, I wondered, than Jesus. So maybe today you're feeling, well, Jesus, you're just asking too much of me. Why me? Why now? And whatever it is, it just seems too much and too hard. And Jesus, you just keep asking. Come on, Jesus, give me a break. Maybe you feel like Jesus let you down at some point. Maybe you've got some disappointment with Jesus this morning because something didn't go the way that you hoped it would or the way that you prayed it would. And maybe what's creating a barrier to faith for you today is believing one of Satan's many lies. Maybe the lie you're believing is that, well, it'd just be easier if I got to be the boss of my own life rather than this idea of surrendering to Jesus as Lord. Maybe it'd just be easier if I was the boss and decided rather than letting Jesus decide. See, I think there's just endless barriers to faith, just all kinds of reasons that people offer for turning away from Jesus and turning back to the way they lived before Jesus. And when truly following Jesus is difficult, I think we have a decision to make. Do we press on in faith towards Jesus, or do we turn back to the things of the world? Now, Jesus knew that his disciples were struggling as he presented to respond, Lord, to whom shall we go? Yes, Jesus, this is a really hard and confusing thing you're saying, eating your flesh and drinking your blood, because the law is real clear. Drinking blood was prohibited. I'm confused. But where else are we going to go? You see, when life is difficult, when it's confusing and doesn't make sense, I think we each have one of two choices. We could turn back to the world, or we can turn towards Jesus and join Peter in saying, we have come to believe and know that you are the Holy One of God. So that means every day, you and I, we have a choice to make. We follow Jesus or we turn away from him. See, there is no in between. There is no both and in this case. We don't get to follow Jesus and follow the ways of the world. They're incompatible. And Jesus doesn't allow that. He doesn't give us that option. So it's just not possible to say, I'm going to keep some worldly stuff. I'm going to keep a little bit of Jesus because I want to keep him happy with me. We either follow Jesus or we don't. It's that simple. That is challenging. In him, in part through this act of eating and drinking. In Matthew's gospel, we read this. Jesus took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took the cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for the many for the forgiveness of sins." We are now going to receive the Lord's Supper. So as you receive the emblems this morning, and you'll find that there's bread. We always have a little bread, but it's like this little chiclet of bread. I want you to have something more substantial as we reflect on and think about Jesus, the bread of life. So you're going to receive the cup that represents his blood. You're going to receive the bread that he says is this bread of life, the true manna from God. And as you receive the emblems, I would invite you to consider what it means to you to believe and know that Jesus is the Holy One of God.